Good Tuesday morning to you. We are coming live to you from the Ami Hotel in Corpus Christi. I have my very dear friend and prayer partner, Pastor Patti Morlock.
Hi.
We are both here at Convocation, and as I told you yesterday in the airport, we're going to do something a little different with our series, Can You Relate? Patti and I are going to talk a little bit about Joseph. So if you've been following the narrative in Genesis, the 35th and 36th chapter, we read a lot about Esau and his wives, and they're such minor characters that I kind of skipped over them. And I thought the next real main character for us to talk about is Joseph. Of course, in chapter 37 of Genesis, we have this introduction to Joseph. He's in the fields, and he is the favorite son of Israel, which is Jacob. With his 11 other brothers, they're not too fond of Joseph. Joseph gets himself in a lot of trouble. He's kind of the know-it-all brother. He has special talents, and he's able to have these dreams that God will use in the future for God's plan, for God's people. So there's a lot of details to Joseph's story, and I asked Patti today to join me and tell me about what she thinks is one of the key moments in Joseph's life that might be good for us in our series of Can You Relate? Patti, what do you think?
Well, as I looked at the story, and there are several chapters that this goes through. Joseph was a brat. I mean, he really and truly was. He was the baby of the family, the youngest son, and as Jody said, he was a know-it-all. And as a result of that, he paid the consequences for his, for being who he was. Really, is what it boils down to. And so he was sold into slavery. And so here you have, the first, well, maybe not the first, but, an example of human trafficking, right? He's actually sold. And as a result of that, a lot of things happen in his life that I think we can all relate to. He's elevated to a position because of his gifts, but then he's thrown into prison because he's accused of something that he didn't do. He's accused of having relations with Pharaoh's wife, and so he ends up in prison, and then he tells these dreams to people and all of those things. But in the end, his dreams, the prophecies that he gives, come true, and because of that, and because of what happens with the famine in Egypt and all of those things, his brothers, the very brothers who sold him into slavery, come into his presence to purchase some grain. The thing that strikes me about this whole thing is that in the midst of everything that Joseph's been through, he's able to bestow grace upon his brothers. He's able to call them out, by saying, well, bring back your youngest brother, and then I'll know you're telling me the truth. So he calls them out in a gentle way. He gives them back their money that they paid for the grain, and unbeknownst to them, he puts it in their bags, and they don't know what's going on. But his ability to forgive, his ability to embrace the brothers, and in essence then to bring the father back and have this wonderful reunion is a powerful moment, I think, for me. I think about, all the times that I've been wronged or falsely accused or being a brat in my own way. I think that we all have that in our nature to, maybe lord over people, the kind of things that we have that we know about, and we pay the consequences for it. But ultimately, Joseph learns a powerful lesson. And the powerful lesson is that he himself was redeemed. And who is he not to bestow that same grace and that same mercy upon his own family in the end? I think about my family, and I think about how complicated some of those relationships are. And the lesson here for me from Joseph is, who am I to withhold the very gifts that I've been given in mercy and grace and love and forgiveness?
I think that's one of my favorite part of the story of Joseph is Patti's right. He receives grace and mercy, and the funny thing about Joseph's story is that the very gifts that kind of made him a bit of a brat are the very things that God uses in him. God uses his brokenness and uses his failings and his faults for God's purpose. It's funny how God does that in all of us. But exactly what Patti said, it's the one thing that he received that he is able then to turn around and receive.
You know, I look at this passage, and I think about the moment that that Pharaoh elevates Joseph, and what does he do? It's so reminiscent of the parable of the lost son, you know. And so the Pharaoh puts a ring on Joseph's finger. He puts a cloak around him. He puts a gold chain around his neck. And immediately I thought about that whole prodigal son story and how he's restored. You know, and in his restoration, then what happens? You know, he's able to restore his own family.
So that's a great question for you today. As you think about the story, and you can go Genesis 37, 38, all the way through the end, you'll see the narrative of Joseph and how his people, how the Israelites then find themselves in Egypt. That's for yet to come. But think about that for yourself. You know, what are the things about you that you see as a strength, but really are limitation, are a weakness? That the one thing that keeps you from being part of the community that God has invited you into. What are your growing edges? Because I think that's the depth of where God works in all of our lives. And then, as Patti said, you know, what is one thing that God has really worked within you, has shown to you, that you are now gifted and available to show to one another? Grace is a great opportunity to reflect on God's goodness, is that we are all shown incredible grace. We're forgiven every day. Are we withholding that same grace from those who need it most in our lives? Are we saying, you're not good enough to receive it, when we ourselves have not been good enough to receive it? It's worth thinking about. It's worth wrestling with, as Joseph wrestled with all of the goods and bads of his life, the highs and lows. I never think that God causes these things to happen, but God certainly has a profound way of working through them.
You know what? If you look at the trajectory of the story of Joseph, the thing that runs through there, all the way through, is his use of his gifts.
Yes.
And I think about that with us. You know, God has gifted each of us with something very specific, and sometimes it gets us in trouble. You know, I'm a pretty assertive, outspoken person.
I know nothing about that.
But I feel that God calls me to speak the truth in love. Sometimes that gets me in trouble. But throughout the course of my life, that has also been my saving grace, is that gift that God has given me. And so perhaps you could ask yourself, what is it? What is it that God uses in me? What is the very specific thing that He has given you that is a wonderful gift, but also sometimes causes pain? I think there's sometimes suffering in using what we've been given.
Absolutely.
But Joseph was faithful to that the whole way through.
Absolutely. Well, a lot to think about for this Tuesday morning. If you are complaining about the background noise, please don't call Marin. It's not her fault. I'll find a quieter place tomorrow. Anyway, have a great day and look forward to seeing you again tomorrow on Can You Relate?